Reading reorder paragraphs guided practice. Let's begin. Here's the first question. Please pause the video, try this question, and then you can come back and resume. Here's the solution. The first thing that you need to do, quickly skim through and understand what the text is about. So just read a few words from each paragraph, from each sentence. And when you do that, it will also tell you clearly that some of these paragraphs, they can't come in the first position. For example, the last one, it must trust. So it clearly refers to it. It's something that should be defined before you can use the word it. The sentence before that, except in the smallest of NPOs. So except, so it's introducing an exception. That means it should introduce, so talk about something bigger before that. And then we can say that there's an exception to that rule. So that way, when you are first skimming through, it gives you an idea of what the text is about and makes it easier to figure out how to arrange them. The first thing then that you need to do is to find the opening sentence, opening paragraph. And if you look at the first sentence, when the organization employs a CEO, the authority to make many decisions is delegated to that position. So yeah, this can be an opening sentence because it talks about an organization employing a CEO and delegating the authority, decision-making authority to that person. The next sentence, the most important thing to understand about the decision-making role of the board is the concept of delegation. But if you look at this, now this is a much broader sentence because it sort of tells you in general that the role of the board, what the role of the board is in decision-making and how delegation is very important in that respect. The concept of delegation is very important because the authority gets delegated from board down to the CEO and to other members, staff and volunteers and so on. So this we can say is a large umbrella sentence. So that's why it's the first one. Now, the next sentence should be something which focuses on some element of this sentence. And the main idea here was about the decision-making role of the board. When you look at the sentence beginning with except, so except in the smallest of NPOs, the boards cannot make all the decisions. So this clearly talks about the decision-making role of the board, and it says that the board gives a reasoning for why delegation is needed, that the board cannot make all the decisions. And in the previous sentence, there's the mention of the role of the board and the concept of delegation. And this paragraph, this sentence, it tells that the board cannot make all the decisions. So it sets the stage to further explain how the delegation works. Now, if you arrange these two in the correct order, then that's one pair and you will get a point for it. So similarly, next, look at all the paragraphs one by one and try to find a link between them. For example, the third paragraph, it must trust staff and volunteers to make many decisions. So it refers to the board. In the previous paragraph says that board cannot make all the decisions, and that's why the board must trust staff and volunteers to make the decisions. Now, in the next paragraph, it says when the organization employs a CEO. So now an alternate scenario that a CEO has been appointed, so the authority is delegated to the CEO. And finally, again, summing up and linking to the first paragraph, that now the only decision that is left with the board is to make sure that the organization is performing satisfactorily. So that's how you go about it. You'll often, in the first go, you'll arrange it. Then when you read it, you'll find these two paragraphs, they seem out of place. So you can try to change the position and then read it. Because overall, when you read the sentence, you have to judge how it flows from the beginning to the end. All of it should tie together. And that's why this is the correct option, because you can see from the first paragraph, the first sentence to the last. The first starts a concept, the final paragraph, the last paragraph, it wraps up beautifully. So that's why this is the correct order. Let's go to the next question now. Let's look at the answer. Here we are. Let's quickly first skim through the paragraphs that are given to us. The answer is that logic is an enormously powerful tool for arguments. Logic lets us embrace. Someone new to logic might wonder, there are infinitely many particular arguments, for example. Right. Now this is something about logic and about arguments, etc. Let's pick the first sentence. The first sentence, the opening sentence is, someone new to logic might wonder, why would we want a definition of good argument that does not guarantee that our conclusion is true? So it's a good way of starting the topic, because the topic is going to define what a good argument is and is going to talk about logic. So it begins by saying, someone new to logic might wonder, why would we want a definition of good argument that does not guarantee that our conclusion is true? Now, if you read this independently, this sentence seems complete. It can be an independent question on its own. And since it's a question, in the next, what makes sense? The answer. That's the first paragraph. The answer is that the logic is etc., etc. After that, since you've given an answer, you can give an example. So that's why we have the sentence with, for example, there are infinitely many particular arguments that have the same form as the valid argument given above. Now, there are two sentences left, and you can see there's one about invalid argument. So it sort of goes with, matches with the previous sentence. In the previous, we say there are infinitely many particular arguments that have the same form as the valid argument. And similarly, there are infinitely many particular arguments that have the same form as the invalid argument. So we take that. And finally, it's kind of a wrapping conclusion statement that logic, let's embrace all these arguments at once and reject all those bad ones at once. So all the ones that are good and valid, we can accept them and reject the others. So in this, there's a logical link between the first and the second. The first is a question, asks the question, and the second answers the question. And by putting this in a question and answer form, sorts of gives us a definition, tells us about what logic is and how we can use that to check arguments. And if you see at the other sentences, now there's again a logical link that we have given an explanation. So there's an example, and then the sentence after that is a complete opposite. So that goes with the previous one. And the final sentence is sort of a conclusion. Okay. So that is the correct order. Make sure that you spend some time understanding this clearly, and also compare, how and what reasoning you have given when you arrange these paragraphs in whatever order you have. So it's important to understand both why the order is correct or why the order is not correct. Next question. The answer. Let's skim through the text. According to John Galloway, Vice President, etc., etc., at PepsiCo, our job is to invest in where customers are engaging. US consumers go to web 15%, media, online migration, advertisers, marketing, online. Okay, so this is a text about marketing, advertising, and more specifically, advertising online. Now, let's first start with finding the lead sentence. Like first one, according to John Galloway, unit, our job is to invest in where consumers are engaging with media. So it's an independent sentence, but if you read this, you will ask, why are we quoting somebody? What has happened? What is he saying this in response to? So that's why it's not an opening sentence. The next one, US consumers go to the web 15% of the time they spend with all media. Yeah, this is a completely valid opening statement, complete in all respects. The next one, this online migration. So what does this refer to? And the last one, most big traditional companies are very cautious about Oracle, but now they are cranking up their efforts as this media channel continues to gain legitimacy. So this is fine. This could have been an opening sentence, but initially when we do this one, the US consumer, that seems more like a better introduction because everything follows the consumers. So they spend 15% of the time they spend with all media, they spend on the web. And then immediately after that, we can add the next sentence. This online migration makes the web where the action is for many advertisers. And now when we are talking of advertisers, that's when we can bring in most big traditional companies and their efforts. They are cranking up their efforts as this media channel continues to gain legitimacy. So that's why it makes better sense here that we first start about the trend in advertising, then we say that bring in advertisers, and then make it more specific, which advertisers? The big traditional companies. And then in the end, now we quote this particular executive from Pepsi as an example of what the big traditional companies are doing. In case you have a doubt, as I said, you can first also put this first sentence. If you put that in the first order, and after that you try to arrange So let's say the last one was the first. Most big were very cautious about marketing online, but now they're cracking up their efforts as this media channel continues to gain legitimacy. And then after that, what would you say? Do you give this example or do you bring in the numbers? So it doesn't really make sense the way the whole text would if we start with US consumers. So as I said, there will be a bit of experimentation, trial and error that you have to do. The main thing is you don't spend too much time, you don't get stuck. Okay, so if there's any confusion, if you think this is first, put that at the first position and try to arrange the others and then review in the end. If you think the fourth one is the first, put that in the first position. And then obviously when you try to arrange it, you'll struggle and it will force you to rethink. Okay, so there's always a bit of trial and error, and you might have to move the paragraphs a couple of times around to find the right order. That's why I always say leave maybe 20, 30 seconds in the end just for a review to make sure that the order is correct. Let's go to the final question in this practice session. Let's see the answer and let's read the text. General categories, challenging behaviors, these categories, more specifically, a more specific and objective description, etc., etc. All right. So this is about the types of behavior and self-injurious behavior, etc., and aggression, different types of behavior, basically. Let's see which is the first sentence. General categories of challenging behavior include, yeah, that's a complete sentence. So that can be one. The next one, these categories. Which categories? The ones that are referred in the previous sentence. So obviously this is not the first. More specifically. Now, more specifically, if someone is beginning a sentence like that, then it means before talking about something specifically, it has been mentioned or discussed in general. So it's not the first paragraph, it has to follow something. And similarly, the last one, a more specific and objective description is necessary because one person's definition, etc., may differ from another person. And as you see, these were already in the correct order. Now, it can happen, okay? And if you come across a question in which they are already arranged in the correct order, then be confident. If you have a reasoning, if you think they are in the correct order, don't just change the order thinking that they will never give them in the correct order. Okay. You have to be confident and you can check by trying to see what's the link between the pairs. For example, these categories and general categories gives me the confidence that these are arranged in a correct order. So that's why if you are confident, just leave it at that. Make sure you take out some time to practice this independently in the test software.